Did you know that the global book market was valued at $132.4 billion in 2023, and it is likely to expand to $163.89 billion. This means that the book publishing and distribution industry is huge, and it's a huge part of global economy. Now, how does globalization, especially neoliberal globalization, impact books, but more importantly, the novel as a genre? Let's talk about it. So I want to talk about the novel, literary as well as popular, and how does it perform within the neoliberal globalization, but how does globalization impact it as well? In order to do that, we do need a nuanced understanding of what do I mean by globalization. My understanding of globalization isn't a simplistic one where I just assume that everything in this world is one global market and everyone is an equal participant in it. My understanding of it is as neoliberal globalization. And if you're curious about it, I have a whole webinar on neoliberal globalization, which you can watch. But by and large, what I mean by neoliberal globalization is that it's kind of global economy, which is structured in a way in which commodities can move freely, capital can move freely, but labor is kept fixed in place. And most of the times, the policies, even though they promote trade, they do privilege still the North Atlantic regions or the rich countries of the world. And the labor-intensive jobs are mostly exported to developing countries. And that's roughly how I think of globalization. Not necessarily as an equal so-called playing field for everyone, but as a hierarchical place with freer movement of goods and capital and restricted movement of labor. Now, within that, the novel as a commodity, of course, moves more freely across borders. I just gave you the figures of how many books are published every year and how big a market is it. But on the other hand, the novel also takes on the challenges of globalization, especially the novels written by people whom we call the postcolonial authors. These are the authors who, of course, live and work in the countries which were formerly colonized, like Kenya, Nigeria, India, Pakistan. And then diasporic authors from the former colonies who live in metropolitan cultures in United States, England, Australia, but who still deal with the issues of their primary cultures and the struggles of their people in the diaspora, but also in their home countries in the wake of colonialism. So if you look at England, back in the 80s, people were pronouncing that the English novel is dead and no great English novels are being written. And at that moment in the mid-80s, it is the diasporic authors who save the British novel. People like Salman Rushdie publishes Midnight's Children, reviving the British novel, but also the post-colonial novel, a novel in which England is figured prominently, but that is not the prime locus of the novel, right? The novel is about the origin story of India. So within the globalized world, then, it is no longer just possible to just write an American novel or just write a novel of London, because you have to incorporate within that the very diversity that informs these metropolitan cultures, but also the issues that beset not just people living in New York and London, but the issues that deal with the lives of people in what was previously called the global periphery. So the novel becomes more expansive and more global. And increasingly, more and more people from the global periphery start publishing and writing more, and more of their works are recognized and are read by wider audiences. So, if we were to ask ourselves, how does globalization impact the novel, then it impacts it in one way, that the construction of the novel and its narratives itself is globalized and must include and does include the stories of people beyond England and beyond United States, their struggles in their own countries, or their journeys to the metropolitan cultures and their experiences, right? So let's take some examples. If you want to read a novel which deals with post-national questions of identity, post-colonial questions of identity of a nation state, so you can take Ngugi Thiong'o's Devil on the Cross, which deals with the issue in identity and the betrayal of the promise of freedom by the leaders, right? If you wanted to read a novel that tells us how globalization and its economic policies impact human lives, for example, you could take Rohinton Mistri's A Fine Balance, which tells the story of some Indian characters, urban, whose lives are impacted by policies beyond their control, right? Similarly, if you wanted more of a focused sense of what happens during colonialism, right, and a novel accounting for that within a globalized world, and that is, you could read Flora Nawapa's Ifuru, which is an African feminist novel which tells the story of a female character in Nigeria who lives her life according to the powers that she draws from her own culture. If you wanted to read a novel which is posited within this globalized world, where you get to read the lives of an immigrant woman who comes to America, and which paths does she follow and how does she make a life here, you can read Bharti Mukherjee's Jasmine, which is a story of a Punjabi woman from India, Jasmine, and her coming to America and then finding a life here, but also of her struggle. So overall then, as the world, so-called, has become globalized, in which commodities move widely and cultures have more of an exchange, the novel itself has had to incorporate that shift within its narrative style, within the characters that it presents, and the settings within which novels are produced, right? So to sum up, overall then, we can say that globalization has had an impact on the very structuring of the novel, on its setting, on the themes that are represented in the novels, but more importantly also, the critiques of neoliberal globalization are also part of what we call the postcolonial novel or the diasporic postcolonial novel. And all of these things, in one way or the other, have made the literary and even the popular novel more relevant to global audiences, to the global readers. So if the market for books is billions upon billions of dollars within this globalized world, then the novel itself has to offer itself as more than a New York story, as more than a London story. And hence, not just because of the actions of the diasporic and postcolonial authors, but because of the imperatives of the market, the publishers have to constantly now offer novels and writings that aren't just about the metropolitan cities and cultures, but that are more global in nature and cover more than just the stories of Europeans and Americans. And those are the trends that we are seeing in the novelistic writing and production of novels. So based on this brief analysis, I can suggest and I can say that the novel as a genre of writing has a bright future, and it will increasingly keep becoming more global and more attentive to what's happening in the world, not just in the United States and Britain and France, but also in Africa, in the Caribbean, in South America, and in other parts of the world where the policies of globalization and neoliberalism have had an impact and are constantly impacting human lives. So that means that the novel, may it be political or simply cultural, has a great future, not just as a representation of globalization, but as a critique of the destructive aspects of neoliberal globalization. So that's all. I hope this was useful to you. Let me know what you think in the comments. And briefly, the playlist related to this topic will come up. Please see if you would like to watch any other videos. And if you do send me your comments or your suggestions. Thank you so much for your time. Please stay safe, take care, and I will now see you next time. Until then, as always, peace and love.